Hello students, today we will be looking at part 3 of our works of Mies van der Rohe, and though in this entire presentation we will be specifically looking at one building, but that one building is speaking to us many things about what happened with regard to the glass and steel skyscraper movement in the 20th century, and how Mies van der Rohe laid the foundation of the modern day glass and steel skyscraper. Looking back, we saw a few buildings of Mies van der Rohe to understand his overall design philosophy and majorly about his concept of minimalism. In 1927, he had designed one of his most famous buildings, the Barcelona Pavilion, and then in 1930, he designed one of his most famous houses, the Tugendhat House in the Czech Republic, which became a landmark for modernist residential development, a part of the overall international style movement at that time. Then we looked at the IIT Illinois campus, we specifically talked about the Crown Hall and the definition of universal space, an open column-free interior that is adaptable for multiple uses. Now when we just have a glimpse of the Crown Hall again, it is basically a set of different parts put together. For example, and the parts in a sense are independent of each other, they come together as to form one building. One is of course the steel frame, the structural frame, which is the columns which we see on the outside of the building, and the inverted beam at the top or the girder at the top, so that on the inside there is no beam. Then there is the flat roof, there is the acoustical ceiling underneath the roof, there is this open exhibition space, there is the glazing skin all around the building, and that is also completely non-load bearing, in a sense standalone, and then we have the main entrance of the building. When we compare with regard to asymmetry and symmetry, there is a very interesting fact that comes out. As long as he was designing in Europe, we look at the Tugendhat House, we look at the Barcelona Pavilion, we find there is an asymmetry in his building composition. But the moment he steps into the USA, most of his buildings we find have a very strong axial symmetry. So if we compare the Barcelona Pavilion here with the Crown Hall, we find that in the United States, the works that followed, they were mostly having a very rigid axial symmetry. Now I do not have a specific reason for that, but it is a very interesting fact. Now when we talk of the modern glass and steel skyscraper, in rapid succession there were 4 buildings made that led to the development of the glass and steel skyscraper. The first was the Equitable Savings and Loan Association building in Oregon by Pietro Belluschi in 1948. Then there was the UN headquarters, which was a set of architects working together, which included Oscar Niemeyer and Le Corbusier, but the work is majorly attributed to W.K. Harrison. Then there is the Liver House by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill in 1952, and the Lakeshore Drive Apartments by Mies van der Rohe in 1951. USA again was a global leader in the evolution of the modern glass and steel skyscraper, like it had been earlier in the Chicago School movement. Now this particular type of building, this glass and steel skyscraper within the international style, also came to be known as corporate modernism. Corporate buildings in the modernist style, buildings symbolic of the corporate identity, and this building that you see here is the Dirksen Federal building by Mies van der Rohe that he did in the latter half, in the last years of his life, 1964. Now when we come to the Equitable building, it was the first fully functional aluminium and glass curtain wall building. It had an RCC frame on which the skin of glass and aluminium was hung, and no part was projected more than 2 centimeters. It was lightweight, non-load bearing facade, and an early example of climate conscious modern materials, like the use of aluminium that was corrosion resistant, and the use of thermopane glass that was a new technology at the time for increased endothermal comfort and energy efficiency. There were no operable windows, it was a fully centrally air conditioned building, and the modern HVAC system helped in improving the energy efficiency. It had external sun shading mechanism to balance daylight with solar control. It used prefabricated modular components, so on-site construction work was reduced, time was reduced, wastage was reduced, and it was a moving towards a more industrialized and efficient method of construction. The Equitable building is a forerunner of what we call as green architecture or green buildings today, and it was one of the first glimpses of sustainable design thinking in buildings. Then came the United Nations headquarters, 1952. It's a very slim building with two very vast glass facades that you see in the forefront and the back, and on both sides of it the end walls are in white marble. This building by W.K. Harrison and a team of architects like Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer gave international style a global visibility because it was the building of the United Nations, and this sleek verticality with glass cladding gave it became an international style civic building, and it emphasized modernism as a universal language in this building, simply because of the purpose of this building, that people from all over the world, from different countries, were represented here as the United Nations. Then came the Liver House, again 1952 by Skidmore, Rowings and Merrill. It was a green glass box, it had a flat base, and then there was a slender tower rising at the back of it. It introduced the glass curtain wall to corporate office building, and it established the tower on a podium concept. It had a podium, a low height podium, and the tower was in the rear of it, and I believe we have talked about it earlier also when we were talking about the skyscraper revolution. And this building influenced urban planning, urban zoning and site planning both. It was transparent, and a very sleek corporate image was represented by the Liver House, and also it had a public open space at the ground level. This box that you see, the low height box, has an inner courtyard. Then came the one building that defined the glass and steel skyscraper in those early days, and that was the Lakeshore Drive Apartments, 1951 by Mies van der Rohe. First high-rise building to embody Mies's minimalist vision and his concept of a skin and bones architecture. And we will see the reason why this glass and steel skyscraper by Mies was different from the others. The way he articulated it, the way he defined the elevation, the kind of elements he used, it very clearly showed that this was going to be the one building that would be the epitome of modern glass and steel skyscrapers. And not only this one, we will see one more later, that is finally the summation of what we would call the 20th century skyscraper, and that is the Seagram building. It was glass and steel purity in this building, a visible frame, a floating skin, a prototype with having structural clarity that is to be seen in a modern skyscraper. And how he brought it, we will look at that. Now it consisted of two identical 26-story towers that were placed 7.6 meters apart from each other, and their longer the axis, they were perpendicular to each other. This is how the two buildings were placed. The towers were connected to each other at the ground level by this travertine stone platform that connected both of them together. So again he was using a very expensive stone. It had a very sleek skeletal frame which was based on a 7-meter grid. This was a 7-meter grid which is clearly expressed in the elevations. Now when we look at the floor plans of both the buildings, one had 8 small apartments in the north tower and the other had 4 large apartments in the south tower. Also he brought in an access core right in the center here, and this was a zone of service rooms around a fixed access core which allowed for the rooms to be divided by lightweight partition walls. So again it goes back to his earlier idea which he used in say Crown Hall, etc. that the apartments themselves were flexible. They could be arranged in various configurations. So the central core, from where all the interior spaces opened up, there was flexibility in the apartment configuration except for the bathrooms and the kitchens, and there were alternate possibilities that were already built in within the way the building was designed. It was minimalism. There were minimal internal walls, and thus there was unobstructed panoramic view from the building from all sides, and the facade of all the sides of both the buildings were exactly identical. The orientation was not taken into consideration. All the sides were having the same glass facade. Now there were various flexible options within the apartments. This slide actually shows you the number of ways in which the apartments could be put together. For example, it could be a completely open apartment and you could walk in and you could have one single space, except that there is a kitchen. As you come in on the left side, there is a washroom here and the whole space is completely flexible. We will again look at the same idea in the Farnsworth house, which this slide will follow later. In the Farnsworth house, in a house, he had done the same universal space concept. This is the idea of the universal space being carried on into his other projects. So again and again we find this thing happening in the case of Wright, Corbusier and now in Mies. The ideas that they have brought in earlier stages of their architecture, the ideas that have succeeded and worked, they keep on repeating those ideas in different contexts. And for example, here he is doing it in an apartment building. So the other plan is you walk in and this is another apartment here, again it is an open apartment. Then there is a semi-open apartment because there is a partition wall kind of a thing here. Then again there is a semi-open apartment, then there is a standard apartment where there are proper partitioned wall, partitions are provided for proper rooms separating one from the other. So different configurations are there, flexible options in the apartments is there. The columns are in black painted steel sheets. The original column is an I section, around it, it has been provided with concrete for fireproofing and then it has been cladded, covered with black paint on the outside. There is a rigorous consistency in the design we see in the uniform treatment of each building. Like I told you, regardless of orientation, the facade is the same. Now Mies said this, Skyscraper reveal their bold structural pattern during construction, but when the outer walls are put in place, the structural system is hidden and then the form becomes meaningless. So we can see that the new structural principles is most clearly that we can now use glass, which is feasible today since in a skeleton construction these outer walls are not carrying any weight. So Mies was very clear about it, that the outer wall should be in glass. Now the steel I-beams are welded on the outside of the structural column. This is very interesting. You see, these I sections that you see here are non-load bearing. Now why did he provide these I sections? One could be that he was stiffening the frame of each way. The second is, which is the important point, is the creation of a surface texture. Had these I sections not been there, this whole facade would have become very monotonous. It would have become very smooth facade, but by providing these multiple I sections in between this 7-meter span, these I sections consistently provided help in relieving the monotony and they emphasize the verticality of the overall elevation. You know, the overall form, it increases the sense of verticality with these vertical lines. So in a very subtle way, Mies van der Rohe added ornament into his building, and this was in a sense criticized by modernist purists. Now this whole idea of providing these I sections is based on the principle of what is called as articulation, and it can also be called as tectonic articulation. That means we are articulating how the building has actually been constructed. We can visibly see the constructed elements of the building. In this case, the I sections are not actually serving the purpose of structural, they are not bearing any load, but they are just emphasizing they are removing the monotony and increasing the verticality, the sense of verticality of the building. Now I am comparing this with the Wainwright building, where Louis Sullivan had brought this idea of articulation. You see, when you see these columns here, every alternate column is non-load bearing. Why has he added that additional column? In order to increase this sense of verticality. Louis Sullivan had said that this tall building should, its tallness is its one of its most identifying characteristics. It should in all senses appear tall. And how do you make it happen? By increasing the number of vertical members on the facade. And the facade itself underwent transformation from the earlier example of the Crown Hall in IIT Illinois. In IIT Illinois, I'm sorry, not in Crown Hall, but in the Alumni Memorial Hall in IIT Illinois. Here, this was the structural system, and there was a screen wall in front. But as we move on towards Lakeshore Drive Apartments, we find that in both the buildings, he has removed the screen wall and replaced it with a glass curtain wall. These are the ice sections, and when I say about tectonic articulation, these ice sections are actually in front of the mullions between the glass panes, and they are highlighting those mullions. We will come back to this point when we look at the Seagram building. These are the interiors of the apartment of Lakeshore Drive. And in the design principles, there is a clarity in the structural facade. Unlike the other three buildings, this is much more well articulated. The ice section that I told you is one of the important things he has done to articulate to define the entire facade. There is honesty in the use of materials. There is an integration between the indoor and outdoor spaces because there is extensive use of glass, and this laid the foundation of glass and steel skyscrapers globally. Mies's vision of high-rise living. The other buildings, the three buildings that we saw, the one major difference is also that they were all office buildings. Whether it was the Equitable building or the United Nations or the Liver House, they were all corporate. Primarily Liver House was a corporate office building. UN was an institutional building, Equitable building was again an office building, but Mies's vision here was of an apartment building, high-rise living integrated into the urban life. So to summarize, there is a steel and glass curtain wall facade, there is an exposed structural grid, there is minimal ornamentation, there is flexible open floor plans, there is a pilotis-like stilt that is provided at the entry plaza, emphasis on natural light and views, and there is provision of the communal amenities. So if we try to see this idea being carried over to other buildings, they were for example in the UN Plaza apartments again by W.K. Harrison and Abramowitz in 1975. Then very currently we have the 432 Park Avenue building by Raphael Vanoli. It looks very different from the Lakeshore Drive. What it has is of glass and steel. We have talked about this building in slight detail in one of the earlier presentations. It has got glass and concrete skyscraper, and this grid facade, this very well articulated facade is what is coming from the Lakeshore Drive apartments. The Miesian logic of repetition and rational proportions are seen throughout the facade of this building. There are also minimalist interiors with an open layout, and then there is this panoramic view from every apartment. And like the Lakeshore Drive apartment, this is not a corporate building, it is a residential building. Then there is one Madison in New York by Cetra Rudy in 2014. So all these three buildings that I have shown you, all of them are high-rise apartment buildings in line with the Lakeshore Drive. And then there is the High Line 23 in New York by Neil Denari, which is the most innovative and one of the most defining tall buildings of our modern times, which was done in 2007. It is a part of a very interesting project called the High Line project, and hopefully we will look at that project in the later slides. And here this shows this is a view of the interior. This is the actual interior of how the apartment looks like from inside. And here in this slide I show you within a matter of 50 to 60 years what tremendous evolution has taken place in tall building design, the way the skyscraper looks today. There was another building that was proposed to be built in Chicago called the Chicago Spire by Santiago Calatrava. It was to be one of the tallest buildings in the world, and it was labeled as the giant drill bit. The work was begun, I think the foundation initial stages were there, but then it was never built. In the Chicago Spire, I want to compare it with the Lakeshore Drive. This is how the interiors compare with each other. You again get a panoramic view from the apartment like in the Lakeshore Drive. So like in the Lakeshore Drive, you have the way the kitchen has been planned, it's an open kitchen. So same thing happens in the Chicago Spire. And when you look at the flat design, the apartment design, you walk in and you get the entire view open from here, and there's an open kitchen, there are washrooms, and then there is an adjoining bedroom with a partition wall. Very similar open planning of the apartments as in the Lakeshore Drive. So we'll end here, and next slide we'll come to two of his projects called the Farnsworth House, and then we'll look at the Seagram building. We'll also look at a few more projects that Mies had done, but we'll not go into details of them. Hopefully we'll pursue the details of those projects in our later presentations, but therein we will talk a little bit more about what is called as tectonic symbolism through the Seagram building. Thank you.